My name is Mackenzie Lowes. I was in Allison Molina's seminar, and this is my ECS 210 personal narrative. For this discussion, I've chosen to talk about a few events or pieces or pieces of information that have helped shape my education philosophy and my understanding of the curriculum. In this reflection process, I intend to look at my growth as a pre-service teacher through the blog posts as well as assignments that have supplemented my learning process. One of the first things that I looked at the start of the semester and really had kind of a challenge understanding was the curriculum and its process and function as a whole. And during the lectures and the seminars, we looked at what is curriculum. So the two main components I kind of looked at and tried to understand as best I could was what is curriculum, and I use curriculum as common sense and the curriculum as public policy as ways to understand it. So at the beginning of the semester, I was introduced to the idea of common sense and looked at the curriculum in a different manner after reading Kevin Kumashiro's article, The Problem of Common Sense. In this article, he introduces readers to the notion that common sense is what has always been done, and it has roots to kind of a traditional model of education, and it has oppressive ties when it's traditional. And supporting and maintaining a traditional system of education is commonsensical because it doesn't tell us what schools should be doing to improve or anything. It just tells us that this is how it's always been and this is how it's going to continue. And that's what makes it oppressive. After reading his article, I was adamant to address the traditional way the education system has been maintained, and I intended to modify it for the betterment of every student in my classroom. As stated in my blog, The Problem of Common Sense, a response to Kumashiro, I said that I will help establish a new, more progressive system and thus alter the way in which the dominant and privileged body of society views and interacts with the people who are always deemed the other. That way, all groups learn the content that is relevant to them, and no person or body of people in my classroom is going to be more privileged compared to their counterpart. The other idea that kind of helped me understand curriculum was curriculum as policy. So I personally had no idea what curriculum was, and when I learned that it's a policy made by not just the government, that kind of helped me understand how curriculum is and how it functions. So I learned that curriculum is a series of policies shaped by a number of entities, so be education administrators and the government and the public as well. And I always believed that it was just mandated by the government and teachers were expected to teach it. So I grew to understand how political the curriculum is and that education is a lot more complex than just a government mandated document. In understanding the curriculum, though, I was introduced to ideas that have established the curriculum as well as help maintain it. I have learned that there are oppressive ties to education and that it's my role as a teacher to fight these oppressive undertones that are hidden throughout our education system. Another important idea that I was introduced to, and that has kind of helped me as a pre-service teacher understand how I'm going to teach curriculum, is treaty education. So I know I've gone through multiple Indigenous studies courses at the U of R, but despite having an adequate understanding of Indigenous history in Canada, though it could always be strengthened, I was never really shown how important treaty education is. And it wasn't until the Treaty Education Conference in September that I began to realize the weight treaty education has in maintaining ties and kind of fighting oppression. So during those 2 days, we addressed our own stereotypes and thoughts about Indigenous people. I challenged my own perceptions about Indigenous people and made the connection that because I never actually learned about it in high school or elementary, nor connected with any Aboriginal person, I kind of followed an us versus them model. I was just me, and then they were just some other entity that I never really got to know. I continue to function and interact in my society with these with these ignorant undertones and perspectives about Aboriginal people, and I thought I knew about them, and I thought these opinions that I had were supported for the longest time, but it wasn't until I learned that I learned, or it's because that I learned that I didn't know anything really, that I was allowed to change. And in my group during the conference, one of the most eye-opening things that I saw was that out of 35 people in my group, 2 people raised their hands when they were asked if they learned about residential schools or Indigenous education. And I think that's when it really hit me. I need to learn more, and I need to be able to teach this, because learning about Aboriginal history should not start at university. It should start way before that. And that's when I really began how important it is to teach treaty ed. We're on Treaty 4 land. The content taught in education is largely Eurocentric, and it privileges non-Aboriginal people. There are very few students who know about the number of treaties and residential schools and other complex issues facing Aboriginal people. And when students do learn about Aboriginal history, it's so little and so temporary. And students tend to trivialize that material, and their perceptions about Aboriginal people, the stereotypes they've made or supported for such a long time, aren't really being challenged. And that has been a personal experience. I was never, like in high school, I never really got to look at Indigenous education in an in-depth manner, nor did I get to explore different concepts and ideas. It was really just, oh, here's a quick 10-minute blurb about residential schools, and then that was it. So in teaching treaty education as an educator, I think it would help cut oppressive ties to education and be more culturally responsive in my classroom. For the second fragment of this, kind of my approach to curriculum, I really wanted to talk about my teaching philosophy, because I think this year was the year that it really changed drastically compared to all the other years. It started out with, I believe children are great, and I believe I love children, and all the overgeneralized stuff like that. But when I got to look at Kevin Kumashiro in an in-depth way, and John Dewey, I think I really began to see just what I believe in and get to really challenge or support my notions. So John Dewey, for me, has been one of the more influential philosophers for me, because when I first studied him, I was intrigued with concepts such as education is a process and knowledge isn't a fixed set of facts, but rather an experience. So during my Curriculum Theorist's Guides assignment, I really understood that my own teaching philosophy aligned with his, because education is a process of things. It's not just you go to school and you learn outside the schooling environment, and that's what this is. So while it does start with the student, they learn from the house, the school, and then the out of education or out of school environment as well. These all are catalysts for a student to learn. They all matter in one way or another. And I thought it was valuable for me, and I thought this would be an awesome belief to have, and I resonate with it so personally, because I never got that, and I think that's why learning wasn't authentic for me during elementary or high school. So I think just valuing personal experience or life experience for my students would be an important thing to do. My second philosopher or theorist was Kevin Kumashiro, and he's a little bit more of a contemporary theorist that I used, and it wasn't necessarily how much my philosophy aligned with him, but I used him more as someone who helped challenge my beliefs about education, my beliefs about the curriculum, and all of that. So his anti-oppressive theory surrounds the notions that there are students who are oppressed in the classroom, and this commonsensical way of teachers teaching it continues to let oppression play out in schools. So it happens whether they are aware of it or not. So I used Kumashiro's understanding of oppressive education to challenge my own beliefs and practices. And I think in understanding this, I'm learning to adopt more of an anti-oppressive theory of education that would benefit both me as a pre-service teacher and eventually teacher, and my students as well. So I'm teaching more culturally responsive, and I'm teaching not just a select few students who are privileged, but I'm teaching all of my students. And then for me, to conclude this, while this course has been super effective in challenging beliefs and helping me see a different light, or helping me see education in a different light, I think it's been pretty uncomfortable kind of looking at different concepts and realities that teachers and my students who have been oppressed and stuff, like how it is. I think one of the hardest things that I've had to do as an education student, though, was look at a curriculum document that I'm semi-familiar with, that I haven't actually got to teach with, and critically think about it and its implications, about its underlying message and how it can be changed. It was increasingly challenging for me to look at the document and say, History 30 is Eurocentric because there's no Aboriginal perspective, or there's like no Aboriginal history being bolded or being deemed as important and stuff like that. So it was quite a challenge, but to me, it's helped me discover like the Eurocentrism that is kind of hidden in the curriculum, and I found a way to approach the curriculum in a way that wasn't really oppressive to to certain students. So an understanding that the orientation of the curriculum and the underlying message of it, I think it's easier for me now to take in treaty education and implement it in the curriculum so that everybody's being taught effectively. But for me, treaty education has also been quite uncomfortable. Kevin Kumashiro says that if you want to improve as a teacher and continue and teach anti-oppressive education, you have to be constantly uncomfortable. There's no being comfortable with having your beliefs constantly challenged, and it's hard to teach specific people that you're not really familiar with, but it is important if you want to work for the betterment of society. And so treaty education for me has been very eye-opening, because despite learning about how important its role is in teaching every student, I do feel uncomfortable about it, but I know that that's a step in the right direction, because that's what all teachers need to do if we're on Treaty 4 territory and if we're teaching a diverse range of students. And despite fearing that I won't know enough about Aboriginal content, or I'm not experienced enough, or my learning tasks aren't going to be authentic enough, I think that with the help of professors, Indigenous elders, people like Claire Kruger, I can definitely make my classroom more anti-oppressive, more equitable, and just a better learning environment for all my students. And I think teaching treaty education doesn't just set up a specific body of students, it sets everybody up. We see a different side of things. We're not privileging a specific body of students. In fact, everybody sees a more authentic side of history that Canada has, and we don't just learn about Europeans. And it's better this way, because it kind of helps with the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal relationship. We foster this. We get more information about it, where our students are educated about it. They know enough to understand why there's a Treaty 4 gathering every year in Qu'Appelle Valley. They understand stuff like this, and it's very important if we're all if we're living in Saskatchewan, to do so, because this is our history. So integrating treaty education in the classroom, for me, would be a learning process as a teacher. It's for me to constantly improve, constantly learn, and it's also for my students as well. So to conclude, learning about the undertones or the underlying message that the curriculum has and the impact that the public and the government and all of these different institutions have on the curriculum is important, because if we're going to analyze the curriculum and work towards more anti-oppressive education, we have to be able to teach everybody, just regardless of religion, gender, skin color, history, belief, whatever. We have to be able to teach a diverse range of students.